All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope all of you guys are having a great week. We are almost to the weekend. I hop on a plane tomorrow, heading up to Seattle for a couple weeks, so I'm looking forward to that. But just quick hitter today. We're just going to hit for about 10, 15 minutes on this stuff that happened with Deandre Ayton yesterday, as well as the report from my friend Tony Jones at The Athletic that Donovan Mitchell may or may not be headed to the New York Knicks. So just quick hitter today. Starting with Ayton, restricted free agency is a really strange concept. We've been talking a lot about this over the course of the last couple of months, but this idea that it is kind of important for teams to have some control over players for the health of the league. You need to have the ability for teams to retain the players that they draft, because that breeds another level of loyalty and intimacy with the fan base, which breeds the strong local fan bases that allow the franchises to make more money, which obviously the money gets split 50-50 with the players. We've talked about this a lot with the Golden State Warriors. They are the team that makes the most money in the league. Obviously, there's stuff having to do with Silicon Valley playing a role there, but a huge part of it, in my opinion, is the consistency within the franchise. The Warriors fans are rooting for the same core group of personalities, from the owner to the GM to the coach to the players, that they've been rooting for the better part of a decade now, and for many of the players for over a decade. So in that sense, team control is an important part of this process, and it exists in most leagues in some way, shape, or form. Like we know in the NFL, they have the franchise tag. You can retain a player for, I think it's like the average of the top 3 players at their position in the league, and it may not seem like it's fair in the sense that it takes away some agency from the player. And like I've talked about so many times on this show, I understand that angle from the players. Like, it's kind of ridiculous that a team can trade a player whenever they want, but then the player is expected to demonstrate loyalty and cedes so much control to the team in that regard. But at the same time, it's about the health of the league. That's why that exists. You don't want your, Buffalo Bills franchise drafting Josh Allen and then 4 years into his career, he's like, bye guys, I'm going to the Dallas Cowboys. Like that would spurn the Buffalo Bills fan base to the point where many of them would be reluctant to invest emotionally in that team moving forward, right? Like, that's why team control exists. But at the same time, things like restricted free agency are strange. Like, it's weird that Deandre Ayton goes to the Indiana Pacers and sits down with their front office, sketches out a deal, plans their future with the franchise. Hey, we're going to partner you with Tyrese Halliburton. We're going to make a run at this thing. Oh, we're even going to waive and stretch all of these role players to make room for you on our cap sheet. And then 6 hours later, the Phoenix Suns matched the deal, and now he's going to be a Sun. It's really strange, but this is just how the situation works. I want to come at this from a couple of different angles, because I really don't understand what the Suns were trying to accomplish here. First of all, Ayton was always going to get a max. Okay, in a minute, we're going to talk about why big men are not necessarily worth investing in, relative to other positions on the floor in the game of basketball. But no matter what, the reality of this situation in this league was Ayton was going to get a max. And I don't think Indiana was the only team. There were probably a handful of others that would have given Ayton close to that had he not struck a deal with the Pacers, right? First of all, he averaged 21 points and 13 rebounds per 36 minutes last year. That's pretty damn productive. He was 76.4% in the restricted area. This is always the thing that stood out the most to me on film when I would watch Ayton. Amazing hands and ability to finish around the rim, not just by going strong, but also when someone's pinned on his backside, he's got a really, really good short half hook shot. You guys think a hook shot is like the Kareem or the Magic. Half hook shot is kind of like a in front of your body, like push floater over your left shoulder. It's a shot that every single big man in basketball absolutely must have, and DeAndre Ayton's one of the best at it. Among players that have at least 2 post-ups per game, and I think Ayton averages around 3, but among players that average at least 2 post-ups per game, Ayton was 6th in points per possession at 1.04, which is the same as LeBron. Now, it's not the same, because you're not like just randomly posting up Ayton all the time, but he was bullying mismatches there. What was typically happening there is, Chris Paul or Devin Booker would come off of the ball screen. And, with these drop coverages, the way that they're supposed to work is the big man is supposed to corral the ball handler, but stay back far enough to handle the roll man. But what typically happens, and happens a lot in the NBA, especially in the regular season, is the guard who's supposed to chase over the top of the screen will get caught on the screen. And when the guard gets caught on the screen, the coverage changes. Usually they communicate. They'll just yell switch typically. And at that point, whoever the big man is will go out on the guard, and the guard who was guarding the ball handler will then peel off of the ball handler and stay on to the big man. And typically he'll get low and try to push him out of the lane. Like you get low and it's like a box out. You're basically trying to box the big man out of the lane so that he can't get a quick seal post up, or so that he can't get an offensive rebound while the guard is attacking the big on the switch. On those plays, Chris Paul in particular was really good at just kind of pulling the ball back out and giving Ayton a couple of seconds to fight on that guard to get a quick post up or seal. Then they'd throw the ball in and he'd score. So like the vast majority of his post ups were against mismatches, against pick and roll switches. But at the same time, like that's a very efficient number. 76% in the restricted area, 1.04 points per possession on post ups. That's really good stuff. Like as far as like Ayton is not Embiid or Jokic, like make no mistake, he's not those things. But what he is the best possible version of the tier of centers below that. He's, in terms of role player centers, he's as good as you'll find in the league, which is why he was obviously going to fetch a max somewhere around the league. Defense is still kind of a mixed bag with him for whatever, and metrics are impossible to measure defense. It's all eye test. And with Ayton, it's classic like hot and cold. When he's engaged, he's a dominant defensive big, but he can be aloof sometimes. He can miss help. He doesn't make a ton of extra effort plays and things along those lines. But then you'll watch him like guard Giannis in the finals, and you're like, man, if he's not getting this kind of iffy whistle, he's actually doing a pretty damn good job, right? Or he'll do stuff as a rim protector that's really impressive. So it's a mixed bag, but at the same time, like overall, the package of Deandre Ayton as a center is as good as you'll find in the league as a role player. So it was obvious that he was going to get a max somewhere. That's the reality of the situation. I understand why Phoenix was hesitant to pay him. We talk about this a lot on the show, but big men are like the running backs of the NBA. The reality is that a max, an expensive running back like an Ezekiel Elliott, I think the Cowboys pay him about $20 million a year, if I remember correctly. An expensive running back like Ezekiel Elliott's going to give you a certain amount of production, right? But then you'll have like a lower level running back, like essentially a minimum contract level running back in the NFL that can give you, 80% of what Ezekiel Elliott can give you? So the gap, in what you're paying for versus what you're getting relative to the discounted version is a very small gap, right? But then you look at like the quarterback, and the type of quarterback that's going to sign a minimum deal in the NFL only gives you a tiny percentage of what a top tier quarterback is going to give you, right? That's just the reality of the way the game works. The quarterback is a much more influential position on the game. Basketball is the same way. When you're a role player center, typically the vast majority of your impact on the game is going to come down to screening and rolling hard to the basket, sitting in the dunker spot to catch lobs or drop-off passes when guards drop to the basket, and guarding and pick and roll on the other end of the floor, and then rebounding, right? And so Ayton can be exceptional at all of those things, but then I can look at a JaVale McGee who is pretty good at all of those things, and I'm going to pay him, a veteran minimum or a taxpayer mid-level exception, right? So I'm paying a tiny fraction of what I'm going to pay Ayton, and I'm going to get the vast majority of the same type of production, right? So like I understand Phoenix's hesitation to want to pay Ayton. Here's where I have the issue. Make up your mind what you want to do. If you simply don't want to pay him, let him go and let him sign with the Pacers. Okay? If you don't want to lose the asset, get out to all the other GMs and start trying to facilitate a sign-in trade so that you can recoup some assets. What I don't understand is if your intention was always to match the deal, all you did here was create emotional baggage between you and your player that is a partner with your franchise. it's about picking your battles. I as I've told many of you guys before, I worked in real estate before I got into this business. And, in a real estate transaction, there's what's called the BINSR phase, or it stands for like buyer's inspection needs and seller response, which essentially means here's our list of things that we want you to fix based on our inspections. And then we negotiate back and forth a couple of times, and then we come up with a list or a payment, and we move forward, right? Well, in those situations, I've always advised my clients, I'd say, pick your battles. Like, it's not worth being like, hey, fix this outlet in the kitchen when the outlet might cost you $100, and that extra item on the BINSR just adds to the irritation that you cause the seller in that situation. I always say, like, pick the big things. It's better to have a BINSR that's got like fix the air conditioner, fix the roof, because those are huge core pieces of the house that need to be working before you move in, rather than like, here's 17 little things where the seller is going to get the list and look at it and be like, hey, screw this guy. He's nitpicky and like all these different things. In a real estate transaction, it's so important to maintain, what's the word I'm looking for? It's so important to maintain like a good relationship, because you never know what can happen over the course of the transaction. And if something pops up, you want to be on good terms both sides so that you can come to the table and make a deal. If you piss them off over something stupid in the inspection period, then if something happens during the final walkthrough, they might be like, screw you, man, I'm sick of you. You know what I mean? It's important to maintain like a quality relationship between both sides of the transaction. That's kind of the way I see this. You knew you had to pay Ayton a max. You knew he was going to get it if you went elsewhere. By doing this, you might have saved yourself 1 year on the deal, and maybe, the raises aren't as big as they would have been. But we're talking about chump change relative to the totality of the salary cap. So you got a tiny discount on what you would have had to pay Deandre Ayton. But the downside is Ayton just had this, it just sparked a relationship with the Indiana Pacers, and you shot it dead. And now you got to bring him back to camp. And now Ayton looks at you guys like you don't value him enough. And so now the relationship is fractured between you, the franchise, and the player Deandre Ayton, the agency that represents Deandre Ayton. I just don't see the point. It's not a battle that's worth fighting. It's one thing for the Brooklyn Nets to look at Kyrie Irving and be like, this is not a guy we want to build around. We need to put our foot down here. That's one thing. But Ayton, you can complain about the way he played in the playoffs against Dallas. Hey, guess what? The entire team fell apart. Chris Paul sucked at the end. Devin Booker was terrible in the last two games. Mikal Bridges didn't flash enough offensively to help the team. So there's no reason at all why you should put all of it on Ayton. I understand that he struggled, but for all intents and purposes, he has committed to this franchise and tried to give you everything that he has, and you like essentially not burning the bridge, but you damaging the relationship over a handful of $1 million to me is just bad business. It'd be one thing if you were under the impression that you could get him for $20 million a year. Sure, send him out in restricted free agency. But I thought this was a battle that wasn't worth fighting. And last but not least, the NBA has a new TV deal negotiation coming up in the next couple of years. Okay, when that happens, all of these numbers are going to be ridiculous. Okay, Damian Lillard just signed a 2-year deal over 2-year extension over $120 million. Okay. So Damian Lillard is going to make over $60 million a year. So how much does it really hurt you to be paying Deandre Ayton $35 million or whatever it is? If I can't remember the exact stat, or less than $35 million a year, in this upcoming economy where the TV deal is going to be so big. Like, chances are a Luka Doncic or a Giannis Antetokounmpo's next extension will include years that are over $70 to $80 million. Okay, like that's where the league is heading. So it just Robert Sarver is obviously, not exactly the stellar example of what we want in an NBA owner, but this is low even for him. Like, I just don't understand what he was trying to accomplish here. All he did was damage a relationship with one of his players to save a handful of $1 million. I was confused. And here we go with the Suns again. They're going to basically bring back the same core. And for all intents and purposes, because of the way the salaries work, Ayton being re-signed and untradeable kind of takes them out of the KD sweepstakes. So we can basically anticipate the Suns being relatively the same team moving forward, unless they target Donovan Mitchell or something like that. Really quickly before we get out of here with Donovan Mitchell. So Tony Jones from The Athletic reports that the Knicks are in the lead. Obviously, Danny Ainge is asking for a ton. From the things that I've heard, it doesn't look like RJ Barrett's in the deal. I don't think Jazz wants. I don't think the Utah Jazz want to pay him, which I understand. He's basically a volume scorer now that's pretty inefficient. He averaged 20 points per game last year, but his effective field goal percentage was below 50%, which is kind of like the baseline marker for me with efficient scoring in the NBA. And then in addition to that, like he's great. He's not great, but he's a good defensive player, but there's not enough there to justify extending this player to the salary that the Jazz would have to. So essentially the structure of the deal would be, some salary filler like Derrick Rose or Evan Fournier with the other young players on the roster. So some combination of Obi Toppin, Emmanuel Quickley, Mitchell Robinson, and Cam Reddish. Obviously the details will be worked out, but regardless of how this shakes down, they're going to be very thin on the wing. And at this point, the only free agents that are available are the guys that didn't get snatched up in early July, which means they are basically the fringe NBA talent that's going to be signing a veteran minimum contract. So this is basically going to come down to Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle and scraps around them. So a lot is going to be on Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell to carry defensive weight because they're not going to have high-level 3-and-D wings around them. This is what concerns me. Jalen Brunson was a good defensive guard in Dallas last year, but that was a Dallas culture thing. We'll see if that translates with Tom Thibodeau in New York. Donovan Mitchell was a bad defensive player for Utah last year, and Julius Randle is not a fantastic defensive player by any stretch of the imagination. So what is shaping up here is an extraordinarily average team. Okay, like this is going to be a team that has offensive firepower, 2 guards that can create their own shot, a forward that can punish mismatches, but none of them are going to be the best player on the floor in a playoff series, and all of them are going to be underqualified for the amount of defensive weight that they have to carry, which kind of puts me to where I was 2 days ago. This is a 45-win team that ends up losing in the first round of the playoffs. But the reason why I support the deal for the Knicks is this is projecting competence. You bring stars in, you treat them well, you get the fan base re-engaged, you have a couple of seasons in a row where you look competent, functional, making runs to the playoffs. That's what gives you the ability to eventually attract the super duper star. Because you're the New York freaking Knicks and you play in Madison Square Garden, and that franchise has been considered a lost cause for a while, but if you can portray them as competent, you might be able to convince one of those guys to come. So I like the deal for the Knicks if it goes through, even though I don't necessarily think it makes them any sort of legitimate contender this year. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. Like I said, headed out of town, but I'm bringing my stuff with me. I'm not sure when exactly we'll go again, probably when one of these trades drops. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss any show announcements or video content that I produce. Don't forget to subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel. I appreciate your guys' support as always, and I'll see you in a couple of days.